Everyone.
Right.
Rachel Applebaum and Laura Haynes and I are co-hosting today's session on finding your niche, which all of us, I think, have been at various stages of this and still working on in ways, shapes, and forms. But today we have a very great panel of three individuals who are going to tell their story and journey of finding their niche. We have Julia Coleman, who's an assistant professor of surgery at the Ohio State Wexner Medical Center. And Julia's interest focus is on sex-based differences in bleeding and clotting, particularly after traumatic injury. So we'll hear about her niche in basic science. We also have Cheryl Zog, who's coming to us from Duke University Medical Center. She's a general surgery resident there, and Cheryl's interests in research revolve around health services and outcomes. So we'll hear about her niche within health services. And Leah Tetebe is an associate professor of surgery at Northwestern Medicine. And Leah's research and academic interests really focus on injury prevention. So we're excited to hear her process of entering that arena as well as developing that niche. But before we get started, I wanted to poll the group since it was sort of a popular idea last time in terms of getting to know one another and just sort of opening the conversation to the group. So I'll share my screen. We have a little survey here. There'll be a QR code. So if you can pull out your phones to be able to scan the QR code. We just want to get an idea from the group, sort of what, where you're at in your career. So resident, fellow, assistant professor, associate professor, professor of surgery, retired, other, just getting an idea of where our group is coming from. Oh, it looks like it's working. I feel like I'm watching a horse race for a second, taking the lead. We'll just give it another moment for everyone to log their current state in their career. So it looks like we have a mix here, maybe associate professors predominating, followed by professors, and then the resident, fellow, and assistant professors after that. So a good mix, which is great. I think it'll be an interesting conversation to figure out where everyone's at with their development of their own niche and levels of career. And that gets into our next question, which I believe you don't have to scan the code again, and it should just pop up if it doesn't let me know. But I'm curious what area individuals have focused their academic interests in.
What happens if you want to pick more than one? We don't have a niche.
No, I would think you're just diverse that way. And I don't know if it gives you the option to pick two, but I wish you could pick two.
Maybe it means you're other, which is okay, which is great too.
That's true.
I know I tried to pick more than one and I failed at that too.
I think that's an important point of discussion though, but at some point, because sometimes people say, oh, you have to have, you know, a laser focus, and it may be true starting out, but I think over time it's okay to be diversified.
I'm curious, anyone in the other group, if they're willing to share what fits under the other.
Education.
Education. Oh, that is definitely a huge one that I did not put on there.
Love it.
Any others in the other group? Well, it's just sort of interesting to see the diverse mix. And I think whether you're speaking to an individual in the same realm or academic interest, I feel like just hearing their process and how they approach it, as Eileen mentioned, in terms of narrowing down maybe to one or another or managing multiple, sort of just interesting to hear. And I think all very helpful perspective. So with that being said, oh, please, Catherine, were you saying something? Well, maybe not. I think with that being said, we can go ahead and jump into our speakers for this evening. We're going to have Julia go first. I know, Julia, you had shared your slides with me. Do you want me to pull them up and go through them, or what do you prefer?
Oh, it's okay. I can do it. Can you all see my PowerPoint?
We can.
We
Awesome.
can.
See the PowerPoint.
Perfect. Okay, great. So I want to thank Rachel and Laura for the opportunity to briefly talk with you all. My journey has been in basic science, and so that's what I am charged to speak of. But I noticed on the poll that I'm the only one. So I'm going to try at least to highlight some of the pearls from my journey that I think transcend and are relevant to all areas of science. My disclaimer is that I am definitely not an expert, and I am still learning. I am like just barely reaching a decade of doing basic science research, and I still have much, much to learn. There's also lots of ways to accomplish the same goal. I'll talk about some of the things that I did, but again, maybe transcend into other areas of research. So I was told to first talk about my journey, so I'll try to keep that brief, but I first was introduced to basic science when I was in medical school at University of Toledo. I worked actually in an oncology lab and did that just in the summer in between my first and second year, really to get experience, but not necessarily thinking that I wanted to do that long term in my career. But what I did know is I wanted to go somewhere academic. I really liked how that environment lent itself to really structured inquisition, whether that was in research or didactics and the educational environment. So that landed me at University of Colorado in Denver. And I had a variety of fantastic clinical and research and education mentors and role models. But one thing that was in common with all of the people that I worked with that I really admired, and here are some of them depicted, but there were many others, is that they were all physician scientists. And they had a natural inclination for observing something at the bedside and then taking that to the bench, whether that was a literal bench to do translational research, or taking that to the bench with a keyboard, a pen and paper, to really try to operationalize what they were seeing and turn that back to the bedside. So I learned from all of these people in many different ways, and that led me ultimately to get really interested in basic science. And so that landed me in the 2-year position in an NIH T32 position at the University of Colorado Trauma Research Lab. And there I worked with Dr. Jean Moore, Chris Silliman, Mitch Cohen, and Mitch Cohen has really become a big mentor of mine and my research journey. And so their lab focused on trauma-induced coagulopathy, which is a huge topic in of itself. But one thing that I was interested in was research that found that females had better outcomes after traumatic injury, and this was most pronounced in the setting of coagulopathy. And we know females are relatively hypercoagulable as compared to males, which we think is an effect of an evolutionary advantage to survive postpartum hemorrhage. So I got really interested in that and wanted to understand why is that female-specific hypercoagulability persists after injury and confers a survival benefit? And is there something that we can recapitulate in our resuscitation practices from that natural phenomenon to improve outcomes for trauma patients? So I started exploring that area. I published, I presented, I applied for grants, engaged in surgical societies, and then ultimately tried to set myself up for success to continue that momentum through the rest of residency. And what really drove me through that, and still does, is my bias is any science of any type is only as important as the way that it translates and back to patient care. And I think sometimes that can get lost in any area of research, but especially in basic science. You really, once you get down to like studying tyrosine phosphorylation cascades, which are super exciting, how does that translate back to the bedside, right? So that was something that I was excited about, but also this has really been my compass in my academic journey, is this cycle of bedside observation, benchside investigation, bedside impact. So I've continued my journey here to The Ohio State University. I did my fellowship here. And during that time, I realized there was no one doing what I was doing here in research, which was a great thing. And then I realized there was no one doing what I'm doing, which was a hard thing. So I have lived the pros and cons of that. But one thing that I made sure I needed to do as I developed as a surgeon scientist and during fellowship as I was getting ready for job interviews was making sure that I branded myself as a surgeon scientist. And so I built a mentor panel of people you can see here that have helped me to continue on. So I want to, enough about my journey, I want to talk about the roadmap to success and getting started for learners. I guess we're all learners, and I know there's some residents and fellows that are on here, but I think the first thing is to be open-minded to explore your interests. I tell this to the med students on their rotations. Like, I did not know that I was going to go into basic science or be a surgeon. And so keeping an open mind is important because you never know. And it all starts with keeping your eyes and ears open on boards and starting to ask questions. That's where science is born. And so for me, I had a notepad that was on my phone, and many times during M&M or in the wards, I would hear someone say like, well, there's no real data on this topic. This is what we do. I'd be like, aha, that is an idea. And I would write that down, and that has led to many of my clinical projects and basic science projects. And perhaps most importantly is identifying mentors and leaders in the field that are doing something that you're interested in. And definitely if you're in residency and in the world of basic science, you don't have time to design and create and build your own research program on something no one's doing as a resident. You should find a mentor that really speaks to you or something that you're interested in that someone's already working on, and find a way to piggyback onto that and then build from there. One thing that I love this quote from Albert Einstein that really highlights that it's all about those questions. Again, when you're on the ward and when you're taking care of patients, trying to really anchor and tether yourself to the clinical questions, because that's where you'll find the right answers. So for anyone, I think these are the pearls of research, which is don't put all your eggs in one basket. So you should try to have multiple projects going at the same time, but not too many that you can't follow through, because that doesn't look good either in your portfolio. But I tried to really, during residency and fellowship, and still now, try to hybridize my research program where I do some clinical projects, but also do basic science. And I have a lot of things going on at the same time, so I ensure success, momentum, constant throughput. But in doing that, it is really important. This is something Clay Burlew really instilled in me. It's like, you need to figure out what is going to be your niche or your brand. It's great to publish a bunch and present a bunch, but if it's on all sorts of topics, it can be, you can get a little lost. And so I think it's important to try to define, like, what are the things that really give me joy, get me excited, keep me up at night, that I want to talk and think about, and try to really hone in on what's going to be your brand, your theme, your niche. Question dogma. That's the whole idea. Back to questions. There are a lot of things that we do, and we do them because that's how we have, but why is it? Like, why do we transfuse patients without thinking about sex and donor and recipient sex? Why do we just treat patients with total agonism to what their hormone status is? That's something I think about. The joy of being wrong. So definitely in basic science. I can't even tell you how much I have done in the last 9 months that I have nothing to show for on paper. But I have learned so much about experiments that went wrong, protocols that didn't work out. And so the joy of being wrong, I think, is a nice way to go about things, an attitude of gratitude, that each time something doesn't go the way you thought, negative data is positive data in my mind. Find your challenge network. Surround yourself with people that are going to hold you accountable and call you out on things that maybe aren't good in your design or some bias that you might be thinking about. Process development is a success metric. I talked about that. And when I was in residency, I read this book, How to Write a Lot. Someone recommended it to me, a practical guide to producing productive academic writing at the AAS course. And I started to read it. It's a very short, thin read. And basically I just figured out that how you write a lot is by writing a lot and just making a amount of time every single day that you're going to write, even if it's just like a paragraph of a paper, or whatever it is that is the product that you're working on. So especially after my son was born, I woke up every morning an hour early and I had admin time, and I just sat down. I made myself read, write, and think for an hour. That was something I made a practice of. So maintaining momentum, the currency of research, for better for worse, is publications and presentations. So you got to find a way to get at the podium and publish. Every podium needs a paper. Every paper has a home. That was something Jean Moore always told me. And presenting, especially basic science, is a skill. It is an art, and it gives you credibility. So if you can't present your work in a simple way, it's going to get lost on people. Lots of great opportunities. The resident paper competition is where I found my science was received well. AAST, WTA, East, ACS, we know these groups. Operationalize your research skills and approach. The AAS fall courses I mentioned, that was super helpful for me. The Surgical Foundations course when I first started. Gordon research conferences, if you're into basic science, are fantastic. They call them like nerd camp, where you can go and have 5 days of informal lectures. And science is a team sport. It is all about building collaborations, especially if you're a busy surgeon. You got to start writing. I mentioned that. Getting experience writing grants. It is an art. And I know, having just submitted my K grant, I've been working on it for 2 years. There's lots of grant targets, big and small, internal at your own institution, societal, DoD, NIH. There's a lot of different grant targets that you can work towards. Once you get a good grant, you can generally recycle the language. Expand your community. So there's more than just the surgical societies we're a part of. Whether it's that you're in education or injury prevention, there are other societies you can expand outside of surgery. Some of mine are listed here. And then lastly, building for your future. So basic science requires protected time, funds, space, personnel. This is also true for other areas of science and patients. If you don't have these things, you can't be successful as a surgeon scientist, period. So you have to be your own advocate, your own marketer to make it happen. And it takes patience. This is what my lab looked like 9 months ago. This is what it looks like now. It's even fuller than that now. It took me 9 months to get all of that going. It takes a long time. Science is a team sport. You got to build collaborations and community. We're uniquely positioned to obtain patient samples back to the bench, but also to bring our translational perspective. I want to say thank you to the AAST, because part of the reason I could do this in 9 months is because of their ref fund and their research grant. So I'm very appreciative of that. So find your niche by asking questions, surround yourself with the right people and resources, find mentors, always keep the patient, the clinical translation at the center of what you do, no matter what your research is. And that's all I got.
That's incredible, Julia. Thank you so much. We're going to go next to Cheryl Zog to share her thoughts on health services and outcomes research. And at the very end, we'll have a Q&A with the entire panel.
Could you give me the ability to share screen, please?
Yes, we'll do that. I think Laura is on it.
Awesome.
Thank you very much. So unlike a lot of my colleagues who work in basic science, and I very much say this having come through the physician scientist training program with med school, health services research is definitely a younger field. And there's a lot of finding the journey that has been a very real challenge, even this early on in my career. And so taking a slightly different step through with this. For those who don't know me, I am a general surgery resident at Duke and moonlighting health services researcher. And a lot of this journey for me really started when I was back in university. At the time, I was something of your typical pre-med student, double majoring in biology and chemistry, knowing that I wanted to go to med school someday, but also finding that I really liked computational coding. And I was doing honors research in theoretical chemistry in a niche field of small molecular quantum mechanics, and genuinely wondering how on earth this was ever going to relate to the patient and the bedside, and even the care of humans as I understood them at the time. The one thing that made this part of my journey, I think, a turning point for me was the fact that I was at a small liberal arts college. And part of what made that important is that the deans of the university strongly espoused this idea of a Renaissance education. So we had very real requirements above and beyond those of my majors in pre-med to take things from a variety of disciplines. And so because of that, I had done anything that seemed vaguely medicine, vaguely interesting, in an effort to fill this unending list of things I had to do. But because of that, I was exposed very early on to things like medical geography, medical anthropology, epidemiology, and higher level statistics. I had done study abroad work in Bangladesh. You can see some of the photos here on the left, doing rural community development work in partnership with the government and a couple of non-governmental organizations, and specifically studying in the field how patients access to care and work through this complex pluralistic healthcare system with everything from private pay out of pocket to issues with a government-based system to faith healers and traditional shamans and various other aspects of village traditions that continue to live on in these rural areas. And when I got back and was getting ready to apply for medical school, my advisor pulls me aside and says, you know, the school is starting this additional concentration in community and global health. As a double major pre-med, I thought she was insane, but she looked at me and said, no, 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 hear me out. You have fulfilled this requirement. And the reason I ask you this is, have you ever heard of a field called public health? Now, going to a small school that does not have a school of public health or graduate programs of any sort, it really was my first time realizing that all of this work and all of these seemingly disparate interests has something of a common name. And so, taking that inspiration, I decided to apply for my master's before pursuing medical training, and ended up out at Johns Hopkins at the Bloomberg School of Public Health in Baltimore, pursuing a dual master's in global health systems and chronic disease biology that included spending an additional year working abroad, doing quality improvement work and clinical research in Bangladesh and Turkey and the United Arab Emirates, that saw me getting involved in biostatistics and sort of honing those coding skills into a more population level analysis while still very much staying a data scientist. And for the first time, really getting involved with surgery, owing to this incredible program that was starting there at the time and continues to thrive at Hopkins, known as the Surgical Mentoring Program. And this was an interesting era when I was going through my master's. Early fathers of the field, you can see the gentleman at the right, we have Birkmeyer and Krumholtz, who's a cardiologist, were some of the first people coining this discipline called health services research, or the idea of taking outcomes research and trying to understand access to care and disparities and policy and how they intersect. You have the late Paul Farmer, who was working up at Harvard, talking about surgery as the neglected stepchild of public health and this need for capacity building and health system structuring, along with a lot of the work I had been doing in infectious disease and sort of hospital infrastructure rollout. And then being at Hopkins and coming home back into this environment after my year abroad, this sort of incredible crucible of early career and mid-career scientists in surgery doing some incredible work with health services research. And it is with so much gratitude to the mentorship of Elliot Hout, Otto Heider, Dori Segev, Timothy Pollock, who are all sort of in this era collaborating in these group conversations at the time that set me on a young path to this even being an option. So of course, as I finished my master's and was set to stay at Hopkins for medical school, these two gentlemen pull me aside and say, you know, you have an interest in research. Have you considered pursuing this further? Have you thought about doing a PhD? And at the time, that was pretty rare. Dr. Hout was one of the first physician scientists working in health services research I ever met. And he was someone who had done his PhD while and attending working through clinical investigator track. But I give great credit to what turned to be a turning point in my life, to a comment made by Dr. Heider, who looked at me and said, you know, many of the things you care about with global health system structure and building are equally applicable at home. And I show this photo that's taken a block away at Hopkins of what the reality of the lived experience of our neighborhoods and our patients so often are. And it was really that juxtaposition that led me to have an interest in working domestically and working in trauma disparities, ultimately deciding to do a predoctoral fellowship in surgical health services research that started working with these two gentlemen at Hopkins and then transitioned up to Brigham in the Center for Surgery and Public Health when Dr. Heider took a job in Boston. Moving forwards, I was blessed to be very successful during those years and ultimately went on to pursue an MD PhD as a physician scientist program through the Yale School of Medicine, earning my PhD in chronic disease epidemiology with joint collaborative research from Yale, Harvard, and Oxford. And such deep gratitude to the mentorship of two incredible women trauma surgeons, Dr. Zara Cooper and Dr. Kim Davis, who were very much some of my touchstone points through this phase of my career. I got very interested, not just in this work with trauma and health services research, but sort of how we think about quality and how we develop quality work. Being at Yale, I was blessed to work with Harlan Krumholtz on some of their, albeit slightly maligned now, but at the era, development of quality metrics and sort of thinking through the day-to-day of how Medicare and how metric development works. And I started to get very interested in how not only does manifest in trauma, but also with older adults, given a clinical interest in sort of palliative care in the ICU setting. But while all of that is very true, what ultimately led me, I think, in this phase of my career to start working more specifically in quality with older adults was the very real pragmatism of being an MD PhD student and trying to get access to data in a way that enabled me to do research. So as I was writing my F30, which is a mentored trainee grant for MD PhD students, the reality you face is that while you can study whatever you like, it needs to align with what your mentors are doing. And so at the time, because I had started with him when he was on his K at Hopkins and it transitioned to an R56 that had funded the purchase of Medicare trauma data, through my connections at the Center for Surgery and Public Health, we were able to access data in Medicare. And while I would love to say that my PhD dissertation was born of a burning question and a desire to pursue an important topic, which it was also a very real world of writing a data for funding within the constraints of data that I was able to access and using that to tell a story and to try and help move the field forward. I've been very blessed that since that time, that research has continued to spread, and I've been able to work on a large body of my own group, as well as serving as a biostats consultant and mentor for everything from junior attendings through aspiring medical students. And this research has continued to largely exist within the realm of older adults and trauma and social disparities, as well as sort of related fun publications that I've done through collaborations with national organizations like the Association of Women Surgeons. I've been blessed to win a number of awards and present at different educational pieces, but it really is that community and that journey that helps to drive thought and to change how we think about these otherwise complex questions. And so to the bevy of mentorship and the importance of just meetings at networks and talking and sort of that collegial environment where we collaborate. So much of health services is a young and building field, and that's what allows it to succeed and to thrive. And I think for many of us, there's also a personal note to the research. And while there are many stories I could tell to this end, there's one in particular one that I think is at the heart of why so much of this is important to me, not just as a provider, but also in a lived reality. The photo on the left was taken in 2018, presenting at a AAST methods course on how to conduct large database research in health services and sort of the merits of the different databases available. And it was about 10 minutes later that I get a call from one of my parents telling me that the woman photographed on the right, who is my grandmother, had passed away from traumatic brain injury. And what makes that important is not just the loss, but the reality, as I had been talking about TBI and access to care, that this happened because she lived in rural Iowa, where transport to the nearest hospital left precious few options and no access to anything like neurosurgical care or an ICU intervention. And so as I'm asked to think about the niche and the importance of what drives so many of us in health services research, it is the very real and palpable connection, not just in our own lives, but between what we see in the clinic and the lived experience of our patients, and trying to drive both health policy and system structure changes that affect that reality. So I thank you, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Cheryl. That was fantastic. Really appreciate you sharing your story with us as well as your personal story. So next up, we're going to have Leah share with us her journey for injury prevention and how she's really found herself in that area.
Yes, and I took the old lady route of the group and did not, I don't have slides, it's gonna be old sort of jock talk type stuff. So I have as was mentioned, so now I've been at this for goodness 8 years or so. I was grateful to hear it. Of all the conversations that Cheryl and I've had, I didn't realize that you had the background. It's like, do you know I was a physics major? Like I did quantum mechanics. Like I love this stuff. I'm total math nerd. So this is why we got along so well. Even though you chose Duke, it's okay. We still love you. You knew that was gonna come up. She's amazing. My story actually includes Julia a lot in this as well, so just be prepared. Your turn is next to get fully embarrassed. So injury prevention, how did I get here? And we'll kind of talk a little bit about the niche aspect of it, because I feel like the higher up you get, more advanced you get, more chronologically elderly you get in this whole process, the more it is that you need to kind of narrow everything down. And that's really, I think, the path that I'm on now. And both Cheryl and Julia have done phenomenal things And I think when I started out, I was just sort of saying yes to everything and just being like, yeah, absolutely, I'll take care of things and I'll do this and I'll do this. And I did some clinical stuff, some outcome stuff. I never did basic science, although I will say that Julie is the only person who can just speak basic science that I can understand. So kudos for that. But my story to injury prevention actually starts with ATLS. When I was a fellow here at Northwestern, I took a ATLS instructor course, and Kim Davis was our course director for it. I'm sorry, not Kim Davis. Kim Joseph was my course director for it. And those of you who know KJ, she is a absolutely phenomenal human with a remarkable intuition about people. It comes from her social work background, and she's on too. Hi, KJ. I didn't even see you were on. I love it. So she was the one who found me at the ATLS instructor course and was like, hey, I think you should get involved in the Chicago Committee on Trauma, do some things, see what's going on. And like every good fellow, I said, yes, ma'am, of course, ma'am, whatever you say, may I have another, and started out doing that. And slowly kind of worked my way, and you're given a project, you do well and you finish it. That's the key. You do well and you finish it, then people give you more. And then you take it on and you do well and you finish it, and then people kind of give you more. So I went from that was my really first introduction to injury prevention, was Kim telling me, hey, can you take on this injury prevention grant that CCOT did? And really, of all of the things that I was doing, I think it's important when you're finding your niche, you got to kind of trust your gut. You got to listen to the things that make you happy and the things that make you frustrated, and walk towards the things that make you happy and walk away from things that make you frustrated. In general, right? We can do hard things, but the day-to-day grind, it's important now to recognize that balance. So eventually, from the injury prevention grant side of it, really got to know some of the community organizations and the fantastic work that they did. And a lot of really what I find value and brings joy to my life is just the word impact. I want to have one-on-one impact with people, with our patients. And that was something that prevention work really helped me experience. So from there, I became one of the vice chairs for the Chicago Committee on Trauma, which introduced me to the American College of Surgeons, COT. And that is where I walked in. It was like, hey, I kind of do this injury prevention thing. Let me go to the injury prevention pillar. And I walk in, and Ronnie Stewart's sitting there, and Julia's sitting there furiously typing on her computer, which is how she writes so much. She just never stops typing all the time, either pipette or type, and has more energy than anybody that I know. And it was because they were so incredibly welcoming. I still to this day remember sitting in the back with these people and Ronnie being like, no, come sit to the table. Like, you can be at the table, it's okay. And just how welcoming and supportive everybody was, and having those conversations. So I am all about efficiency, so I really enjoyed that work. So when I joined East and joined AAST, I got involved in the injury prevention committees there and helped kind of build collaborative efforts, particularly within Chicago, but also within the organizations. And it just sort of slowly built of, give me a project, do well, finish it, move on, and figure out how you can build it, how you can think outside the box, not just go down one path that's set, which I think in any successful endeavor, you have to be able to expand and consider other aspects of other approaches. And I think that's more so injury prevention, like more than just injury prevention. I think that's my niche, is being able to say, let's take this, let's take this, let's take this, let's think about here, okay, now how do we actually put this all together into a cohesive conversation that will have impact? And that's how I approach it to injury prevention. That's how I approach it to education. That's how I approach it to my work with AWS. Like, those are my three things. And I used to have a whole bunch more that I did, and I would sit down, particularly with Hassan Alam, my chair, And he's basically would say, Leah, you got to do like less stuff, right? You got, the higher up you get, the more you got to pick some fewer things because it will take more of your time because you're more detailed into it to do well. And so I did a lot of soul searching of the things that I kind of Marie Kondoed my life and my academic career of what brought me the most joy. And that ended up being injury prevention, where I can be really involved from the ACS part of it in particular, but also the voice of East and with AAST of it's not just academic papers, right? We have open access stuff, which is fantastic, but it's media, it's advocacy papers, it's having conversations, boots on the ground with individuals. It is having different ways of communicating, which I think is really a lot of fun. And then just kind of building off of that. So I would say the big takeaways for me and how I ended up in this was, number one, trust your mentors. They see things in you that you don't necessarily see in yourself. Sometimes they're right, sometimes they're not so right, and it's okay if they're not so right. But I think having faith in people who really care about you and your career, and then also yourselves pay attention to your mentees and just get that pattern recognition of, hey, you have these characteristics. Maybe you can't quite say why, but I think you would really enjoy this. And when somebody tells you that, or if you tell somebody that, I would hope that people kind of respect that and give it a try. Just don't be afraid to try something, because you never know. I would not have guessed that I would have ended up in a huge injury prevention career. This was not at all the path that I imagined for myself, which is why I don't like the question, where would you see yourself in 5 years? This is not where I would see myself in 5 years, but I sure as heck love it. Where am I going to be in 5 years? I don't know, but I'm going to keep walking towards what brings me joy, and what I feel like has impact. Don't be afraid to raise your hand and say, oh, I can do that, and just try it. Just see. You don't know what's going to happen. Definitely trust your gut. Surround yourself with really productive people and who complement you. So my team is people that are really good at things that I'm really bad at. And I'm really good at things that they're not particularly strong at. And that's how you end up being really productive, is working together. But also, again, understanding that at some point, finding a niche means you have to actually let stuff go. And that's really hard. It's really, really hard. And I still struggle with it. I was talking to a mentee earlier about that, but the thing I have in my office more than anything else is my no button, that I have to figure out how to say that. Typically through sponsoring mentees who I think are going to do a wonderful job. But it's, finding who you want to be, what your brand is, but really your brand is what brings you that joy. And being able to say, you know what, I did this, I loved it, but now it's the next chapter and I'm going to move on to something else, and that'll keep it fresh and interesting.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Leah, again, as well, for sharing your story, and Julia, as well as Cheryl. I was just taking notes while you all were talking, and a couple of the themes that I came up with are having a passionate interest in why and how to make things better. Having a challenge network, I think that was a really nice theme through all of yours. Having mentors who will push you. And then having a complementary team, people, again, that challenge network, people who can kind of your yin to your yang, that sort of thing. Being open to suggestion and open to taking failure as a success. I think those were all great things. I would like to open it up to the floor and see what questions are out there, and questions from the audience for our panelists or for anybody. We have an unusually quiet. So, Leandra, yes, please.
Just to get everybody all started, I just want to thank everybody for coming on and sharing, I guess you could say, their truth. And, I find it really difficult sometimes to narrow what the focus is, because there are so many things that you can be interested in. And I think the message is really important here, that really trying, I like that phrase, the liaisons, the Marie Kondoing, is that it, your life, and really trying to focus, because I do think it helps in the long run, kind of moving your career along, as opposed to trying to dabble in everything. And I think it's kind of one of the things that I have not done as well. So I do want to just thank everybody for sharing, and also the understanding that, in my head, I've always wanted to do basic science, but understanding that you have to commit fully and have the right environment is so essential. So, thanks.
Yeah, I will say I have the benefit of having a chair who, anytime I go to him and say, "Oh, hey, I was asked to do this thing, or I'm excited about this," he said, "Oh, great, that's fantastic. So what are you going to give up to do it?" And his figure is, you have 168 hours in a week. What are you going to give up? What is worth suffering for? Because we have to suffer with something, whether it's giving up sleep, time with your family, time to do other things, time to spend time working on something else, developing something else. Absolutely go for it. But how are you going to block your time? Because the only thing we cannot do is just do things faster and think that it's going to all be okay. And making those very conscious decisions to make a decision to say, no, I'm not going to do that one, as much as it hurts. And as soon as I started doing it, it gets easier, especially when you realize that the world isn't going to end when you say no to something, because we all feel like no one's going to come back. But I think to find your niche, you've got to be able to really to focus a bit and to say, this is truly what I want to spend my 168 hours on. And you can see it in people. Like, you can't walk into a room with Julia or Cheryl and not be like, dang, they got it, right? Like, that's their passion. Everybody knows. And so I think it's worth trying to find something in your life that brings that spark whenever you feel like you're in a conversation. What is it that your friends are like, yes, that's something that she can talk about for a long time. That's a good place to start if you're working on trying to figure out what your niche might be.
Fantastic. Thank you. Patricia, you have a question?
Yeah, it's a little bit the opposite of what we're talking about in terms of niches. But I have a fellow who is going to start looking for a job probably another 6 months, and she's like, I don't have a niche. I feel like there's going to be a problem finding a job if I don't have a niche. And trying to help her through, I guess, question is, what would your advice be? That does she have to have a niche? She loves being clinical. She wants to be like the best clinical person she possibly can be. And seeing her stress out or feel like she's possibly less than, I guess, just doesn't seem right. And I'm not sure how to, because I do know that, right? Like, because we do it when we interview for new faculty. We ask, so what are you interested outside of the clinical realm? And it's hard.
I don't think I had a niche. I like sort of have in the last like 2 years, but I definitely didn't going out, and I don't think you need to starting out.
Yeah.
I think it's
Yeah, I'm just sending a comment in the chat here.
yeah, you definitely don't
Yeah.
need a decision.
I think we need to give your fellow the we'll call it a Karenism, which is being a generalist is okay. There is value of a spork. I love that. Thank you, Karen.
I'll take it. I'm gonna print that on a t-shirt for her or something, but
It's sport.
Absolutely. I think that's true. I think it's really hard for a lot of people, because I think we've obviously invited 3 people who have very defined niches that they've really been able to find, but it is hard. It's okay to be diversified, as Eileen was saying up front. Diversification is not a bad thing, and especially for fellows and trainees, half the battle is just giving them the experience of knowing how to do the process of research or quality improvement or anything else, so that they can do it in the future and help help them answer and ask the questions. Yes, Eileen.
I guess as a person who interviews a lot of the people that you just asked me about, I, I think it is, and I think I resonate with what Krista said in the chat, that it's okay to have more than one interview. You should have something that you want to talk about in your interview. It can't be solely clinical work in an academic job. That if you're applying for an academic job, it can be teaching, it can be, you know, I want to be a great surgical educator. It can be, I want to advance the field with some new surgical instrument, whatever. But I think there needs to be something in addition to clinical care. That's what academics is, and that's what people value. And there are lots of jobs that are purely clinical. And so I think it's a question of what environment do you want to be in? What do you want to, you know, what are you looking for? But I think if you're applying for an academic job, it is good to have something to talk about. It can be more than one thing. It can be, I'm not sure yet, but I'm interested in this and this. That's totally fine, because you can evolve as a junior faculty person. But the heart of, at least in my perspective, applying to an academic position is that you have something in addition to clinical care that you want to pursue.
Very well put. Karen?
And I mean, I will defend a generalist with every breath I have. And I think that amplifying Krista and Eileen, it is very hard to respond to somebody coming to an interview that essentially says, I want you to teach me how to do research. It is easy to respond to somebody who says, I have these strengths. I am a very good program builder, even if the program was very small. I resonate with quality improvement, and I can get lots of people to come to the table. I work well with large data, and even if they might not know their niche yet, you can work with that and look at the job you're trying to fill, rather than I'm interested in everything, which again, I will defend generalism with everything I have. And that is very hard to hear from somebody that wants a job, because it makes it difficult for the employer, if you will, to figure out where they might fit into the team. Do they have the complementary strengths that Leo was talking about? So it is phrasing, it's teaching people how to phrase that I really don't know. It's very okay to not know. And those who don't yet know still have strengths that that they can portray in an interview.
Fantastic, thank you. Kim?
Okay. So I may be the least academic person on this call, so my perspective is going to be a little different. I agree with you. I think you go to an interview, any interview, whether it's medicine or something else, you do need to come in with the idea of, here are my strengths, here are things I want to work on, here's what I'm interested in, etc. But I wonder, particularly for this group of people, the sort of mid-career and senior attendings who are on the call, if it isn't also part of our responsibility when we're having these interviews, make it clear to the people we're interviewing that part of our job is going to be to, the word nurture is overused, but to sort of figure out, as we're working with you, the reason I'm asking this question is because if you do come here, I want to try and get a sense of how we can help you accomplish those things that you're interested in, not just, I need to see where you fit with my team and stuff like that. How do I make, I'm thinking now, how do I make you grow, or how do I help you grow? And so yeah, you go into the interview, I think, Patricia, the thing I would tell your fellow is, yeah, go into every interview and say, here are some things that I'm interested in, here are some things that I've done, but somehow make it clear that you're open to new experiences. And I will use Leah as the example. I think when Leah first started off, the initial thought was she was going to do education. She was going to be, and she was one of my great ATLS course directors. But as time went on, part of my job was to look at what she was doing and see the things that she seemed to be interested in and say, I think you got some talent for this, or I think you seem to have an interest in this. Let's figure out whether or not that's the truth. I think that's part of our responsibility as the sort of senior members of the cadre. So yeah, I would tell your fellow Patricia, I would tell her or him, go into the interview, say what you're interested, but somehow make it clear that you're also open to guidance and you're open to new experiences. That's my 2 cents.
I think that's helpful in thinking about niches. What is your strength if you don't have like a set niche? And then it could just be, these are my strengths, this is what I've had experience in, and this is what I've had success in. But if there's anything else that you think these strengths would play to, I'm very much open to X, Y, and Z.
No, I think that's incredibly valid, because like if you look at my career, my CV, the things that I've done, they're all over the place. If you just look at it, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But if you look at really what it is, it's the interpersonal team building communication type level, right? Or it's like the really getting to know the root cause of something to then have an action item on it. That's throughout everything that I do. I'm applying it in different ways, but the tools are right there. And it's important as well, especially if you're changing jobs, right? Like if I had stayed at Cook County versus coming here to Northwestern, I would have taken a different path. I would have ended up in a different leadership role. My skills are still there. The toolkit are still there. I'm just applying it in a different way, but what I enjoy is still that action of it. The result might be a little bit different. But you do have to not only focus on what you enjoy and maximize that, but also be flexible enough to adjust to the needs of the institution.
Yeah. No, I think I feel similarly about my career. Rachel, I couldn't get off mute fast enough, but I was one of the others, and somehow I've become the fixer of the hospital. Like if there's a problem that everybody's like tried one or two things, I then get a phone call, the phone's not working, or we don't know what to do with X, Y, and Z, or we're seeing like longer length of stay, like what's the deal? To the point where one of our residents ended up with a new diagnosis of cancer, and I got a call and I was like, I'm not a surgical oncologist. They're like, no, we have that fixed, but how do we do the rest of it? How do we figure out the FMLA? And like, he just bought a house and has a mortgage and like all this other stuff. And I was like, okay, we'll figure out the logistics.
And I think it's totally okay to evolve as your career evolves. Like, so I was a basic scientist when I started my career. I was Julia Coleman. That was my niche, and I got an R01, and I was running a lab, and then I had an opportunity to do clinical trials with the same thing I was studying in the lab. And I evolved into a clinical trialist, and that's where the money was. So I became a clinical trialist, and I didn't do as much basic science anymore. And then you get involved with the American College of Surgeons, and then you get to do cool health policy and injury prevention and trauma systems, which is totally different. So I think it's totally fine to evolve over the course of your career. Starting out, you need something for the interview, but it's like, that's why I put other, because I think it is like totally okay to follow you, whatever Leah said, follow what gives you joy over the course of your career, because opportunities will come to you that you didn't anticipate, and then you see, wow, this could be really fun. So I just want to put a plug in for, I guess maybe it's a little bit of Karen sport, but there's, it's not unreasonable to change your niche over time.
I was actually going to call out
Dr. Balger, or I'm not going to break rules, Eileen. I was going to call out to Dr. Balger during my talk because I do think there's a lot to be said for the power of the pivot. And I think having a mission statement to help be your compass as you go throughout your career, at least for me in my very, very early start, has helped me a lot. Is that I have a professional and a personal mission statements that have some overlap, but like I have it written on my whiteboard in my office. And anytime I'm asked to do something, I look at my mission statement. I'm like, okay, is this in my mission? And you know, oftentimes it is, and it's not basic science. And I think that's okay. To me, it's all about that pivot.
Yeah, that's
I
my
think-
mission statement right there. That's
Sure.
my annual one that I go through every year.
I think that's important. And I will also say Julia in her presentation said, be flexible and be curious. And so I think those are very wise words, passionately asking questions about why and really pushing yourself forward. It's, you know, I think in the interview process, we all want people who come to us with some sort of interest and curiosity because it shows passion in what we do every day. And so I think that's where, and realizing and helping to mentor our mentees about the fact that some of the things that they're recognizing their strengths and those can become their niche. So any other questions or comments? We're coming up on the hour. I want to be respectful of everybody's time.
I just want to thank Laura and Rachel for putting this together. I think it's a fantastic conversation of how do you actually do this and develop over time. So this was a lot of fun. Learn something every single time.
Well, it's our pleasure, and thank you so much to our panelists, Leah, Cheryl, Julia. It's been a pleasure and a very interesting conversation. I feel like I was jotting notes down, as Laura had mentioned as well, just of different tips and tricks. I too am suffering from the wearing too many hats at the moment and trying to maybe Marie Kondo my life a little. So I'm going to reflect after this meeting for sure. Before we depart for the evening, I would love if everyone would turn on their cameras for a moment, just to grab a picture of all of us together for this meeting. And if you can't, that's okay too. I know Krista had mentioned she's doing some elective surgery clinics, so whoever's able. Let me just get my screenshot on real quick. Okay, ready? Everyone smile. 1, 2, 3. Wonderful. Thank you so much for taking the time. And Laura, when is our next session? I know we were thinking October is what I recall, but
it will be October after our meeting in September. Please join us all for the WITS reception that we will be having at the AAC meeting again this year, just like last year. Will be a fantastic event. And then be on the lookout. We'll also have some reminders about that in our July newsletter, so be on the lookout for that as well. So lots to come, and we will continue to plan these and bring everybody together. This is so valuable. Thank you for teaching me something new every time.
Thanks so much. Have a wonderful summer.
You all as well.